What if the reason you sleep through the night is because someone else didn't? Tonight, we're traveling back to the firelit edges of early human camps, where small patrols guarded the dark so the rest could dream. As you settle in, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Wherever you are, let the day fade. Close your eyes if you like, and imagine the quiet footsteps of night watchers moving beyond the glow of the flames, keeping time, keeping watch, keeping us safe. The night begins with a hush that isn't silence at all, but a gathering of small sounds, the tick of sap inside a branch, the low complaint of insects drifting through grass, the far ripple of water finding stones. Then a spark leaps, and the darkness backs away just a little. Fire takes like breath, a quick inhale of light that settles into a steady glow, and the camp reshapes itself around it. Faces appear and recede, eyes reflecting amber, hands held toward warmth. The circle is not a wall, but it feels like one. Beyond it, a limitless shade. Within it, the day's edges softened and safe enough for lids to lower. This is where sleep begins, not as surrender, but as a kind of trust, given to those who will keep the flame and keep the dark at arm's length. They build the fire deliberately, dry twigs fanned close, thicker sticks laid like ribs, a few seasoned branches angled to catch and hold. Someone knows which fuel snaps too bright and draws attention, which wood smolders longer and keeps the coals alive. When the wind shifts, a watcher leans a log to shape the smoke, guiding it up and away so that it drifts thin and unreadable. Sparks rise in brief galaxies and vanish. The heat keeps night air from biting, keeps the damp from creeping into bones and woven grass mats, keeps little scurrying legs from trying the camp's edge. Eyes on the perimeter linger on shadow, then return to watch the patterns of the fire, because the fire itself tells stories. The pop that could be a seed bursting, the soft sigh of embers collapsing inward, the quick rattle when bark curls and drops. People fold themselves close to the glow, shoulders ease, breath slows, and voices fall to low threads. Someone hums without realizing, an old tone, a thing learned from a parent who learned from a parent, and it stitches together the warmth and the listening. There is food in the coals, a tuber wrapped in leaves, a bit of meat skewered and held just where fat whispers and runs. Fingers release ash and pull back with the prize, the smell lifting through the night and mingling with dust and crushed grass. It is not feast or famine. It is simply enough, and the enough is shared. As they eat, They watch for the eyes, not bright circles hanging in black like in tales, but quick pinpoints at the edge where brush parts. The watchers don't stare. Staring can be an invitation. Instead, they keep the fire between their gaze and the dark, listening more than looking, reading the ground with their ears. The circle of sleep forms gradually. Children slide down the slope of someone's hip, curl into the lap of a blanket. The blanket becomes an arm that becomes a promise. Elders tilt their heads and rest them on knuckles, muttering a few last notes as if setting the mind's stones in order. The place of the water, the place of the trees with the bitter fruit, the place to avoid where the ground talks back and swallows ankles. The watchers memorize these too, because they will move if they must, and they will need to know where to step. Between drowsing and waking, the body learns the fire's tempo. The bright peak, the slow fall, the pinch that means add a stick, the soft slump that means stir. Predators move on padded paragraphs through the grass, ideas wrapped in fur, weighing the distance between hunger and risk. Fire is a language they understand, even if they do not speak it. It means heat. It means scent. It means an edge that is not a thorn, but burns like one. The watchers lean close and speak back in that language. They let the flames rise just enough after a rustle, as if to say, "We see you." It is not worth the cost tonight. They do not shout. Shouting wastes breath and tells the whole plain a story that needn't be told. Instead, a hand brushes dust to make a soft hiss. A foot nudges a dry pile to crackle. A few pebbles are tossed just so. The camp's layout helps too. Sleeping bodies placed with thought, gaps left, where a quick path out or around would be easy. The heaviest logs stacked to pull the eye where it should go. The slow-burning pieces forming a dull orange line like a second horizon. Time stretches in the kind way firelight does, longer than the darkness feels without it. This is when the simplest exchange happens, the one that made nights endurable. One person's wakefulness buys another's rest. A shoulder squeezes a forearm, and there is no request there. Not really. Only a trade. A watcher takes the small burden of the hours and becomes a hinge on which the camp can fold into sleep. Sometimes two watchers sit back to back, the warmth on the front and the quiet weight of a friend on the spine. And in that posture, a community lives, each looking outward, each holding the other in place without thinking about it. Stories do not stop when eyes close. They just move to the fire and to the ones who keep it. The watchers recount the day in fragments and edits, give shape to a memory that will seem simple in the morning. The child who tripped at the river becomes the child who tested the water for all, clever and brave. The failed snare is not failure, but a lesson that will catch twice as much on the next try. The night itself, because it is always an animal to be coaxed rather than fought, becomes an old companion in the telling, known for its habits. There are tools that belong to night, a branch prepared in daylight, its end charred and rust-rubbed to a point for tracing in dirt, a shell filled with sand to cradle coals when the wind insists on playing, a bundle of resin-rich sticks tucked under a woven mat that the dew cannot reach. The watchers have them close, but they make them look like nothing of note because things that look important tend to vanish. They walk the line between showing strength and inviting envy. If another band's firelight flickers far off, it is marked and measured. Is it moving? Is it steady? Steady is safer. Moving might mean a search, and searches at night can tangle like vines. The watchers keep their voices thin and low, shaped by cupped hands so words fall where they should and not beyond. Every sense is widened at night, not sharpened to a painful point, just widened. The smell of water carries farther and tells more, whether it is standing and sour or moving and clean, whether there is rot near it or the sweet green of new growth. The air's temperature shift whispers of clouds or clear sky, of the possibility of a brief chill that would make sleep curl tighter. A thin crack underfoot, no heavier than a twig giving up its last hold, can place the size and weight of a visitor well enough to plan a response. The watchers become a kind of instrument tuned to the plane. In the morning, they will not keep all of this tension. It would make living too taut. But for now, it is useful, and it keeps a line between camp and world that is firm but not brittle. The fire's light does a quiet work on minds. It draws the gaze inward while letting ears drift outward. A peaceful division that lets the brain rest without fully letting go. The watchers speak to that state. They use syllables that roll rather than clatter, words that end gently, cadence that settles the sleepers deeper. Singing at night is not performance. It's maintenance. A song can be a fence, a boundary marked not by stakes, but by refrain. Each repeat says, "This is still us. This is still here. This is still safe." Even laughter, when it comes, is covered lightly with hands, pulled into the chest so it warms without spilling too far. At the fire's edge, the ground shows you its map. Footprints from the day darken and soften. A fresh press is a signature you can read by touch. The watchers kneel sometimes and lay their fingers in the depressions, feeling which way weight shifted, whether a heel dug in or lifted light. This isn't just caution, it's practice, and practice lives longer than any single night. The youngest watchers learn it in pieces, mimicking the older ones' stillness, their unhurried turns, their patient waiting through false alarms. When a shadow is only a cloud covering the moon, a lesson is made of it, rather than an embarrassment. When a fox passes and skims the line of the light like a thought skimming sleep, someone murmurs an old name for it and lets it be. The fire wants feeding, but it doesn't demand it. It accepts a measured hand. A watcher tests a stick at the end, bringing it close until the heat catches, and then seating it where it will lean and stay. The sound of that small placement is its own comfort. There is a rhythm. Watch, tilt, listen, taste the air for the hint of distant dry grass. Scan again. Not alertness that burns fast and leaves a headache, but the sustainable kind. The kind that could be practiced night after night, without hollowing a person out. This rhythm is the first agreement the camp makes with the dark. Each ember is a bead on a thread, connecting those who guard to those who sleep, and the thread holds quietly, not as a tether, but as a promise. Somewhere out there, the plane continues. Hooves sink and rise. Wings adjust. Dew gathers on curled leaves. Here, the watchers sit, eyes moving, hands warming, all of it held inside the soft perimeter of firelight as the night leans close and listens back. Sleep in a band isn't a single drop into darkness. It's a tide that moves in turns. The watch begins before the first bodies give in, with a quiet sorting that everyone understands without discussion. Those who wake easily take the early edge when embers are strong and the plane still hums with activity. The ones whose eyes open at the slightest creak. New parents, light-sleeping elders, the youth who have not yet learned to sleep heavily, are saved for the middle when the night goes thin and brief chills slide between ribs. Toward the last stretch, the dawn leaners, those who always stir before others and step out to meet the grey, take their place. It isn't an assignment written down. It is a rhythm gathered from countless evenings, a choreography the group holds in its joints. A hand taps a shoulder, a chin lifts in answer, a place is exchanged by the fire with the same ease as passing a bowl. No one keeps score, and yet the balance holds. When the day has been heavier for one, the night becomes lighter for them. When someone has carried water farther or ranged longer, their name is kept off the wind while they sleep. There are small rituals at the handover, and they matter because they make the exchange gentle. The watcher returning from the edge does not speak first. They place a stick in the fire and let the flame catch, a soft signal that all is well. The one taking their place looks to the sky rather than to the face, marking cloud scatter and the moon's angle, then finally meets the eyes for a breath-long count. They trade 2 bits of news: what has passed, what to expect. Wind from the salt side, a whisper says. Nothing hungry yet, but the hyraxes under the stones were loud. Or a light far off to the west, steady, not moving. Shared like this, information becomes a blanket laid over the sleepers rather than a stone dropped into the dark. The outgoing watcher knows not to spill all their wakefulness into chatter. The incoming one knows not to let silence stretch so thin that doubt catches. Between them, there is a tension calibrated to carry the hours without fraying. The rotation isn't rigid because the body isn't a clock made of iron. Nights of heavy rain shift the roster toward those who can keep a flame alive under wet air. Clear, cold nights pull in the ones who walk warm. A mother nods to another who has milk if the baby wakes during her watch. An elder who walks slow by day finds their stride by night and takes extra laps around the perimeter, the staff tapping rhythm into the ground like a metronome that the camp falls asleep to. Young ones, eager to prove their strength, are given slivers of time where nothing much is likely to happen, a safe space to learn the art of long noticing without drowning in it. Lessons run under it all: how to sit without letting the legs go numb, how to sip water in tiny, thoughtful sips so the mouth stays ready to listen, how to keep hunger flat with a bite of charred root tucked in the cheek like a secret. There's a pattern to sound that the watch learns and then inhabits. In the early stretch, when the day's heat still rises from rocks and the insects are a choir at full voice, the watcher listens for interruptions, the gap where song should be, or the single note of a pebble tilting under paw. In the middle hours, when even the mouths of the river close and dew lays its thin film on each blade of grass, the listening turns finer. Breath counts from sleepers, the tiny clicks of cooling sticks, the way a distant owl draws a line through the air and then ties it off with silence. Near dawn, the world starts writing itself louder again, and the watcher's hearing tilts outward, waiting for the first stirrings of the animals that graze and the birds that declare themselves. Each part of the night has its own grammar, and fluency means you speak quietly inside it, rather than against it. The body's rhythms are not treated as faults to be corrected, but as gifts to be positioned. Those who find it painful to sleep early are not shamed into the first watch. They are folded into the middle, where their natural wakefulness can lift the rest. The ones who always open their eyes just before the horizon pales are trusted with the last fire tending, so the camp wakes to warmth that never fully left. If someone's dreams run hot and make them twist and speak aloud, that person sleeps farther from the edge, so their mutterings blend with the fire's voice and do not draw attention to the line between camp and world. If someone never seems to hear alarms in daylight, lost in work, in thought, in making tools, they are often, at night, the best at hearing the smallest changes, as if the dark flips a switch that bright hours keep pressed down. The rotation folds all this in, not as rules, but as a habit braided tight over time. Counting time in the watch isn't done with numbers so much as with steady, repeatable acts. A stick placed to burn through a thumb's width marks a span. When it collapses, the watcher takes a lap. Pebbles travel from one pocket to the other, 3 to begin, none to end. Each circuit shifts one, and when the last crosses the seam, it's time to wake the next pair of eyes. The moon is a clock whose hand moves slowly enough to be a friend. When it sits in this notch between branches, a change comes. When it reaches the angle above the lone tall tree, another. The watchers do not need precision. They need continuity. These simple measures keep wakefulness from becoming a formless drift, giving the mind small stones to step on. There is an economy to the watch that makes it efficient without ceremony. 2 people rarely watch alone for long. Pairs and trios trade micro moments between them. One leans into stillness, while another walks to the far side. The third tends a coal quietly, and then they rotate like a slow dance that never repeats exactly. If someone is pierced by a wave of sleep, the heavy kind that pulls like a net, another catches their elbow and walks with them for 100 steps, enough for the body to clear the fog. If the waves keep coming, the watcher is not judged. They are folded back into sleep and replaced early. Tomorrow night or the next, they will carry more. This flexibility keeps resentment from taking root, because everyone has known a stretch of hours that demanded more than they had, and a different stretch when they had more to give than was asked. Signals remain simple by design. A low trill through the teeth means come quiet. A soft clack of stones means look left. A palm dragging once over the ground means lie closer to the center. A higher, sharper note from a reed or a length of hollow bone used sparingly calls a full alert without words. These have been practiced at dusk when children are still playing, and laughter can hide mistakes, so that at midnight hands move to the right shapes without thinking. The rotation includes who carries which signal when, so redundancy is built in. If a reed is lost, a hand can still sing. If both hands are full, a foot can trace. Food and water are part of the rotation because vigilance burns fuel. A skin passes from watcher to watcher, sips measured by a tap on the bottom, an agreed portion of the portion. Chewed leaves that keep the mouth moist are shared not to stay awake longer than is wise, but to stay alert within reason. A small bite of protein or fat is allowed midway through a watch, never at the start, so the body does not think it can trade food for caution. Someone is always responsible for the bundle of quick light tinder and the ember shell. Someone else always for the longer, denser logs that carry through shifts. In the ledger of the night, these are as important as eyes. Some nights a chorus of problems arrives at once. A sudden gust threatens the fire. A distant rumble hints at hooves. A child wakes with a cry that could carry. The rotation allows for this by overlapping strengths. The firekeeper has a partner who knows how to shield and feed a flame under stress. The walker's partner knows how to hear whether the rumble is near or far. The comforter steps in with the child and pulls the sound into their chest, turning a projecting wail into a contained vibration. Each role is mobile, and yet each person knows where to stand first. When the surge passes, the watchers do a small reset, another quiet stick placed, another pebble moved, so that the hours do not slide off their track. In some bands, the rotation is traced into objects that outlast a single season. A chord holds knots whose spacing suggests a typical night. A row of shell scratches reflects moons past, and who took which stretch most often. These are not ledgers for punishment, but for memory, so that when someone doubts their worth, a pair of hands can untie a knot and say, "Here is a night you held when others couldn't." Stories attached to these marks. The storm where the fire leaned sideways and still made it. The lion that tested and thought better of it. The night of meteors when the sky seemed to be throwing sparks of its own, and everyone, even the oldest among them, had to be gently told to stop watching upward and return to watching outward. The rotation becomes a narrative thread that connects people to one another and to the place, and that thread is strong enough to be repaired when it frays. Children learn the watch by inches, as if climbing a ladder built into the camp's tree. At first, they carry a coal from one side to another under supervision. Then they stand with a watcher and are given a single sense to hold. Tonight you are ears. Tomorrow you will be eyes. When they misinterpret a brush of wind as a presence and call quietly for help, they are not scolded. They are told what the wind sounds like as it passes through 3 different kinds of leaves, so next time they can sort the world with finer teeth. When they notice something true, they are praised in the way that stitches the skill to pride rather than to performance. A squeeze of the shoulder, a whispered name for the thing noticed, a shared bite from the watch's small stash. Over seasons, this makes a person who can be called at any hour and will answer not with panic, but with presence. None of this means urgency is absent. When danger is real and close, the rotation snaps tight, not as a trap, but as a net catching everyone at once. The sleepers move inward along paths practiced with eyes closed. The watchers take the places that are theirs in emergency, not because someone points, but because the hours spent imagining this moment have been enough. And after the moment passes, the rotation loosens again, breathes again, returns to the comfort of steady exchange, where nothing theatrical needs to happen for protection to be complete. The art is in staying near wakeful edges without falling over them, in letting one person's vigilance let 10 others rest, and in being able to change places without jarring the night, so the dark remains a companion that can be read rather than an enemy that must be fought. The language of the night was designed to be felt more than heard. Signals moved like ripples, small, deliberate touches that cross the dark without calling the dark toward them. The simplest cues were in the body. The way a watcher straightened meant pause. A slow turn of the head meant look where I'm looking. A hand flexed twice near the thigh meant change places. These gestures lived low, close to the fire, where faces were more shadow than skin, and where the flame's pulse softened edges so movement read as intention rather than accident. When sound was needed, it came in textures rather than volume. A pebble rolled under a palm to make a dry whisper. A fingertip rubbed along bark to raise a faint rasp. A twig coaxed to crackle at the exact moment a partner's breath stalled. Each noise had a meaning because each was practiced until it was as comfortable as blinking. Across the camp's perimeter, materials were placed not as traps, but as instruments. A mat of brittle seed pods lay where a silent approach was most likely. A shallow scatter of shells rested under a thin dusting of earth where a foot would press. A bundle of feathers hung just low enough that the softest brush of fur would make them sigh. None of these would ring out like alarm bells. They were friction added to the night's fabric, places where the world would snag and reveal its motion. The watchers did not look at them constantly. They listened for the way the insect choir would stumble and pick up again, for the way the purling of the nearby stream shifted when a body displaced air above it, for the new seam of quiet that appeared where a path had been smooth moments before. Fire itself carried messages. The keeper knew how to speak with flame without shouting in light. A quick lift of a green twig into the coals made a soft hiss that meant, "Hold where you are." A log nudged to roll so that embers breathed brighter for a heartbeat, drew a partner's eyes to a direction agreed upon earlier. If danger pressed close and human voices had to remain buried, smoke was shaped as a banner. Damp grass laid for a count of 3 and pulled away signaled the walkers out beyond the circle. One drift to the west meant return slowly. 2 thin plumes to the north meant circle wider. A long, steady line meant you are seen. Shift left. This worked even when the walkers were out of earshot. And it worked because the camp knew how to make smoke say only what it had to, never more. The flames were also kept from telling stories to strangers. The fire burned low behind a partial screen of branches, so it cast light inward and bled less outward, a cupped palm of heat rather than a flare. Dogs, when there were dogs, and not every group had them yet, were part of the sentence structure. They were not made to bark at night. They were taught to fold their warning into posture. A raised paw and a held breath meant curiosity. A low rumble that vibrated the ground more than it filled the air meant caution. A head turned and frozen meant direction. Even without them, other animals lent their voices to the code unwillingly but reliably. A scrape that cut short to the south told of a porcupine. A quick series of 3 churs from the thorn bush held a nightjar. The sudden total silence of frogs along the waterline pointed to something heavier than wind. Children learned this like they learned the flavors of roots, through repetition wrapped in play. A watcher would mimic a call and ask for the name, then ask the child to make the corresponding hand sign, then have them walk 10 steps and make the sign with their back alone. No arms, just the shift of shoulder blades, so even in a crowd the meaning could travel. There were calls made through the teeth, small whistles that never really reached the air. A single pulse pulled the closest watcher in. 2 sent them outward. A series of 3 followed by a pause meant count with me. A way to silently time something seen moving in the same direction twice. Some groups used a reed with holes, some used a drilled bone, but the principle was the same. Tiny changes in pitch built into a phrase that carried only as far as it needed to go. The watchers tuned themselves to these micro sounds by occupying quiet inside their own bodies. Wind moved, and the watchers unclenched their jaws so it wouldn't buzz in their skulls. Cold arrived, and they let it sit rather than shiver at every edge, because shivering has its own voice that can drown others. Beside the flame, water skins were lifted and lowered on a rhythm that meant more than thirst. A grounded lift meant, I'm here and steady. A slow tilt with a breath held on the exhale meant, look to me. A deliberate set-down followed by hands returned to thighs meant you take the lead. Distances had to be felt as much as measured. Triangulation happened without numbers. If a stone tossed into long grass sounded twice, once at strike and once at the moment a small body shifted to avoid it, the 2 listeners could paint a wedge in their minds where the creature was and use the world to squeeze that wedge narrower. They would weight a stick on the far side to lean and drop at a precise count, so the creature, hearing it, chose a path that revealed size and intent. Predators test with confidence. Scavengers test with hope. Confidence walks a line and lets twigs break clean. Hope wanders and stops often, unsure of its rights. The watchers learned to tell these from the pattern of small interruptions, and their signals reflected the difference. 3 pebbles clicked lightly together, shared relief. A single flat palm pressed to the ground announced focus without fear. A held hand with fingers spread spoke of a line being drawn that should not be crossed. Even placement in sleep was a signal. Families did not always lie together. Sometimes a heavy sleeper was nested among those whose ears opened at breath's change. So alarm would travel through bodies as heat and weight before it needed to travel as sound. The elder, who always murmured a half-song, marked the camp's center. If his tune cut out mid-phrase, it would be noticed as surely as a shout. Lullabies were more than comfort. Their repetition created a fence. Outside the fence, the same notes would be heard as unnatural, and animals would pause at that seam, unsettled by a pattern that didn't belong to wind or insect. This pause, the moment's indecision, was often all the watchers needed to let a message move from one edge to the other, to let a path open or close subtly without stirring the whole. The ground itself was drafted into the sentence. Before night stretched fully, the watchers brushed narrow pathways, clean of loose grit, so that a single fresh print would read like ink on a blank page. They left a crescent of ash in one place, a scatter of char in another, not to hide anything, but to tell if anything had tried to pass through without consent. When something did, it was rarely addressed with confrontation. A new smoky sweetness added to the fire could say, "We've seen you. We are many. We are calm." And calm is often stronger than fury at night. If the intruder was human and cautious, this fragrance, a burned sprig of resin or a twist of dried herb that smelled of pepper and pine, could carry the message that hospitality would be offered by day, but that now was not the time. There were, of course, nights when hospitality wasn't possible, and on those the signals grew starker. A log dragged to make a long scrape that rose and fell warned all within earshot. 2 rocks struck once, then once again after a longer count meant, "We are alert and ready." Even then, showing readiness without naming direction kept power in the camp's hands. More complex systems sat in the camp's design. Sleeping spaces curved so that a whisper stroked the inside of the ark and returned softly to the sender, a way to know if the air would carry words outward. The fire pit itself had a lip that could be struck with a stick, producing different tones. High quick rings might say, "Gather closer without haste." A duller, slow tap might say, "Someone trade places, no reason to hurry." and these tones were rare enough that they never became noise to ignore. Small piles of stones lived at the four corners of the camp's imagined square. Their pattern changed each evening in a way only watchers knew, and if a pattern was wrong at dawn, the mistake meant the night had been tested. This turned inspection into a communal practice instead of a private worry, and it taught children to read for absence and presence equally. The wind was a collaborator. The salt side wind carried the memory of a distant lake. The dry side wind brought dust with a bitter tang. When the direction shifted, the watch leader lifted a tuft of grass and released it between two fingers. The way it spun told more than weight and angle could say. A downstream wind made voices louder. An upstream wind made them small. If voices were to be used, the watchers let them ride the smaller air. When no voice could be justified, a rhythm could. A palm on the earth counted slow, steady beats that were felt rather than heard, traveling through soil as a tremble only those close by would notice. This pulse could say, "We are together right now." And sometimes that alone steadied the edge so thoroughly that nothing else was required. Signals were not purely outward. They helped manage fear's internal weather. A groove carved into a stick fit the thumb perfectly. Stroking it in a certain pattern was a personal metronome that kept breath from spiking into panic. A small smooth stone in the cheek, rolled gently, reminded the mouth to stay moist without needing gulps of water. A strip of soft bark wrapped around a finger gave the fidget a place to live that made no sound. Watchers shared these small tools the way they shared food, not as talismans, but as parts of the system that made quiet sustainable. The goal was never heroic vigilance. It was long patience, distributed across bodies and hours. When the dark pressed close with intention, the code narrowed. One ember lifted and flipped to land in a drawn circle meant hold. All hold. A reed's note bent down, then up meant count and breathe. A cascade of small, deliberate crackles, sparked by a pinch of resin, meant make the circle smaller by 3 steps. And if the threat probed with more intelligence, as people sometimes do, there were cues that traveled only by texture. A cord drawn across a palm left a faint line felt by the next person and no one else, answering a line drawn earlier on their wrist that had asked for that very confirmation. Entire conversations lived in these scratches and smoothings, detached from sound, safe from eavesdropping ears. The watchers kept the code elastic by injecting play into practice. At dusk, they would set little challenges. Tell me which side the moth came from without looking, or hide a pebble so lightly under ash that finding it by fingertips alone exercised the same sensitivity needed for reading a print in dew. Laughter braided with these games, so the skills never felt like a weight they were forced to carry. They felt like a craft they were lucky to keep. And when a new person joined the band, the signals were taught by pairing them with sensations they already knew. The call that meant return was matched to the memory of a mother humming. The sign that meant wider circle was tied to the feeling of standing at the edge of a river about to broaden. The touch that meant danger but not panic mirrored the way hands steady a pot just as it sloshes. This kept the code human instead of turning it into a brittle set of rules that would crack in a storm. Beyond all of it lay listening, the foundational act from which every signal took its meaning. The watchers scanned not as a lighthouse sweeps, but as a reader revisits a familiar line to catch its changed tone. Their ears traced paths outward and back, stitching loops that overlapped and layered, until the night had a texture they could navigate with confidence. When a new thread was added, a distant footfall, a shift in wind, a voice swallowed by leaves, they didn't pounce on it. They placed it. A pebble rolled once along the knuckles to let the partner know a new stitch was being made. A breath held and released told the sleepers' bodies somehow, without thought, that the perimeter still held. The code served this quiet architecture, and because it served it, it could be light. A few sounds, a few movements, a few marks, and a whole world kept in gentle balance while the camp rested. Each message arriving precisely as needed and not a finger width more. Darkness changes shape when a group stakes a place and calls it home. The open circle of fire becomes a line of posts and woven brush, then a ditch that takes a season to carve, then a wall that takes years of patience and quarried stone. The night no longer leans evenly on every shoulder. It presses first at gates and corners. It pools in alleys and beneath eaves. It climbs towers to test the knees of those who climb after it. The watch, once a handful of quiet sentinels, becomes a craft with tools and routes and rules. Hands that used to measure danger by the sound of grass now also read it in the creak of timber and the way a barred door settles after dusk. A village grows ribs and skin, palisade, rampart, walkway, gate, lintel, latch. The night must pass through fewer places to reach sleeping faces, which makes those places sacred to the living. Closing the gate is a ceremony even when no priest attends. At sundown, faces turn as the big leaf of wood swings, chains thicken their song, and the bar drops into its sockets with a final wooden exhale. Dust rises and settles in the glow of torches or oil lamps. Children crane to see the last sliver of path vanish between the leaves. Sellers count their coins by touch and tuck them away. In some towns, the closing is announced with a horn or a bell. In others, it is simply done, and the sound of it ripples down lanes as people anchor shutters and wedge doorstones. To watch the gate at night is to hold the community's breath between your hands. The keepers stand where road becomes threshold, reading faces that ask to pass through. A cart arriving late is weighed by its wheels as much as its driver's voice. A postern, just big enough for a person and a sack, sits deep in the wall where it can be looked at from two angles. Its latch is clever, and its use is recorded. A tally cut into a board by the lamplight, so that the morning knows what the night admitted. Walls teach the watch a new vocabulary of movement, where once you paced outward, arc and back. Now you walk a narrow wooden way set along the inside top of the palisade, the planks creaking softly under your measured weight. You lean, but not too far. You listen, but through wood and earth. Torches cannot flare high, lest they blind you to what moves beyond. So light is carried low, shaded, or replaced with rushes dipped in fat that glow just enough to keep a treacherous knot from catching your heel. At intervals, a tower rises, not for grandeur, but for angles. Two watchers within can see each other's torch halos, can trade the draft of night between arrow slits, can echo a soft cough that means, "I've noted you, note me." Below, the ditch is not just a trench, but a soundboard. Gravel washed clean of small stones tells more clearly when feet try to cross. A line of pottery shards scattered decades ago and forgotten to all but the watch will whisper at every press. The city is not only defended from without, it must be shepherded within. Fire is tamed by day, but still hungry by night, so the watch carries hooks and buckets and a sense for wood that keeps its breath too long. Lids are checked on hearths. The last baker is nudged to douse his oven proper. The brush lean-to is encouraged to sleep with its tools pulled back from the street. In lanes that turn like the memory of a stream, where houses face one another across a width just wider than two outstretched arms, the watch walks with palm to plaster, feeling for damp where there should be none, for the warmth that lingers too far from any known flame. When an ember leaps from a careless brazier, you hear the difference it makes when it lands on dry seeds versus damp soil, and you decide whether to call for water or for quiet. The tools of this task are humble. A leather bucket patched so many times it is more patch than bucket. A rake with teeth burned smooth. A rattle carved from wood and seed that can wake a lane without waking a town. Law stands up with the walls. In the beginning, it is a set of habits spoken by old mouths. Soon enough, it is a list hung near the gate, scratched on a plank or inked on stretched skin. Lanterns must be shaded after midnight. No cart to roll after curfew without a writ. Carry a light or keep to the side when the watch passes. If a cry goes up, thief, fire, gate, everyone hearing it must add their voice and feet until the cause is found, or the caller proves foolish. The foolish are fined, not to punish panic, but to keep the word cry from becoming a toy. Names attached to hours. So-and-so takes first round on the west wall this month. Such and such keeps the south tower every third night. Widows who know every ear in their lane are given the inner watch, listening for arguments that could breed knives if left to grow. The village that was once family becomes neighborhood and ward, and each ward owes its hours. The wealthy can pay to avoid some of them, and the money buys oil for lamps and spare cloaks for winter posts. Fairness is tested and retested, but the work gets done. The watch acquires its own language of tools, a cudgel polished by palms, a short spear for places where a long one would catch, a horn with a crack that makes its note unmistakable, a lantern hooded with thin sheet so that a slit of light shows downward only. Keys are heavy as thought, teeth like a skyline. The locksmith who cut them is part of the watch, whether they climb the wall or not. They keep the copies like a memory keeps a secret, and when one goes missing, a new key is born and the lock's mouth learns a different bite. Doors change too. A latch that once kept goats from nosing into the pantry becomes a bar with iron rings that two people must lift. Hinges groan less when rubbed with tallow and ash, but not to silence, never to silence. A door that makes no sound is a door that cannot warn. The threshold is swept at dusk. A little sand tells footsteps to the hand, even if the ear is busy. A nail placed head up in a hidden seam, touched by toe on purpose by those who know, becomes a private passphrase that can be altered in a heartbeat if trust shifts. Trade does not stop with sunset. Some towns allow a night market near the gate, a half circle of stalls selling broth and hot stones wrapped in cloth to warm hands under blankets. The watch manages this glow so it does not become a beacon. Braziers face inward. Canvas is hung as a curtain of shadow. A space is left between fire and wall where eyes can rest. Rules for conduct are simpler at night and more strictly kept. No scales after the last bell. No credit. No gathering of more than 5 in a knot. Musicians to play soft and low. Nothing that would suggest a dance. It is not that dancing is wicked. It is that dancing loosens attention and spreads it thin. If a traveler begs late entry, there are choices to be made. If it is storming, the gate may open to them and to them only, with names taken, goods inspected, their fire doused before crossing. More often, a lean-to at the gate's shadow houses the stranded, an inn of last resort whose keeper is chosen for a good heart and a suspicious mind. Watchwords exist whether or not someone names them that. The night divides itself into watches, and each takes a word tied to the moon, to a saint, to the harvest, to the river's level. The word is passed from tower to tower in a way that leaves no echo for the world beyond. Whispered through a slit, coughed into a sleeve, tapped with a knuckle on wood. If a note arrives missung, if a tap falls without rhythm, curiosity tightens into readiness. If a stranger approaches with the right word but wrong timing, the sally port remains shut. The sally port itself is a piece of night's grammar, a small door within the big one, set at an angle that breaks the charge and turns it into a cue. To use it is to go sideways into the city's body, small, controlled, seen from two directions at once. Those who must leave after curfew use it. Midwives called on by frantic knocks, messengers whose feet know the road like a song. The watch's own runners, who carry the city's breath from one lung to the other. Street layout teaches the watch what trouble looks like. Places where lines of sight collapse, blind corners, stair turns, the shadow of a balcony that reaches too far, where lanterns must travel slower and cudgels rest closer to the thigh. The stones of the main walk tell you the weight and pace of the night. One watcher can hear whether a man walks alone or with two others by how the echoes layer under the archway by the cobbler. In towns without stone, where streets are packed earth and reed, the language is dust. A dry scuff means haste. A soft pat means bare feet. A shuffle, then stillness, means someone changed their mind or lost their courage. The watch learns to forgive the second and attend to the first, to coax the fearful home with a laugh and a gentle escort, to turn the hasty by placing themselves quietly and firmly in the space the haste wanted to occupy. Relief has its places. A bench is not just a place to sit. It faces the lane in a way that lets a watcher rest feet without yielding angles. A niche in a wall is not only for saints. It shelters a spare lantern, a coil of rope, a folded net for catching falling tiles during a sudden wind. The Night Soil Guild is part of the plan, moving through with their carts and their knowledge of every back court and culvert. They are eyes the watch does not waste. A nod to them at the start of rounds yields news of who is ill, which houses sleep too fitfully, who left town in a hurry with only half their storage sealed. Bakers too are nodes. Their ovens draw the hungry and the restless, and their ears have a way of gathering what mouths let slip in the comfort of warmth. Institutions grow around the hours. A chief of watch begins and ends rounds by the bell, writes simple marks in a ledger, adds a note when a pattern repeats. Training is no longer the private inheritance of one family. It is a shared apprenticeship. Young men and women learn the roots, the watchwords, the difference between a drunk and a desperate, a stray dog and a scout. They learn a patience that does not humiliate and a firmness that does not growl. They practice holding a lamp so its light does not throw their faces into view. They practice walking so their shadow does not shout their approach. They practice listening to windows without eavesdropping on lives that have the right to their own quiet. Fines exist, but so do favors. The watch carries a list of those who can be woken for help. The healer who will not complain. The smith who can unbend a twisted latch. The neighbor with a pantry that opens when a child is found hungry after midnight with nowhere to go. In bigger places, night is divided into wards, and each ward interbeats. A watch bill hangs in the guardhouse, columns with names, dates, and notes. R for rain cloak, H for hound to be fed and walked, L for lantern oil taken and returned. If the bell rope frays, someone knows before it snaps. If the horn's leather dries and cracks the seal, a pot of rendered fat waits nearby. Everything is designed so that a single failure does not become a cascade. And yet, for all the plan, the essence stays old. One person's wakefulness keeps 10 asleep. A calm voice turns night from threat into passage. A hand on a door says, "You are inside," as surely as the wall says, "They are outside." Above, the stars do their slow counting. Below, water in hidden channels speaks in syllables that only those who walk them nightly can hear. Between them, the watch moves, not as soldiers on parade, but as gardeners of darkness, pruning what grows wild, tying back what leans too far over the path, opening a space where rest can take root, and the city can breathe through, until first light reaches the hinges and the bar lifts again with that familiar welcome thud. Some of what the night watchers carried never put their packs down. It lives in the small seams of our sleep, the turn that checks a window latch without waking fully, the ear that opens before the eye when a hallway board ticks, the way a mother's body rises toward wakefulness at a child's rustle, even from 2 rooms away. We call it light sleeping, but that makes it sound like a flaw. It's a signal braided into us, a thread kept unbroken from the circle of fire to the blue glow of a bedroom clock. A person who wakes and slides back under a dozen times isn't broken. They are doing a job the body remembers, testing the boundary, making sure the perimeter still holds. Even in deep rest, the mind keeps a little listening post manned, and that post is the reason a kettle scream is different in the brain from a distant siren, why your partner's breath is registered as familiar wind while the new drip of a ceiling gets flagged and filed for later attention. You can feel the watch training in the way we fall asleep in new places. The first night in a hotel or a friend's spare room, one half of the brain keeps more lanterns lit. The bed lends you its smell and shape, but some part of you scans. Unknown hallway, unknown foot traffic, the heater with its own strange punctuation. People call it the first night effect, as if it were a trick. In truth, it's a sentinel drill, the old habit of sleeping in shifts performed inside a single skull. One hemisphere holding guard, while the other dives deeper. On night 2, the posts relax a little, the code words get shorter, the embers of suspicion are pushed into a neater pile. By night 3, the watch inside knows the routes well enough to hum while it walks. Micro-wakes, those quick surfaces where consciousness skims like a bird touching water, are the foot patrols of the modern bed. They're brief, usually harmless, and the problem isn't that they happen. The problem is when we grab a flare each time. The screen that flares blue, the notification that rings like a struck bowl, the fridge that kicks on because its belly told it to. These are the alarms we built ourselves, and they are louder than any fox moving through grass. An ancient watcher would look at the phone's light and shake their head. Why carry your beacon in your palm? Why point it at your eyes? But the impulse that made you check, did I lock the door? Did I answer her message? Did the oven turn off? Is the same impulse that made hands test coals, that made a head lift to count how far the night had moved. Some of us live as the dawn leaners and the midnight sitters, even now. We give them names that sound like birds, but they feel more like assignments you didn't choose. One person's blood warms late and carries focus into the small hours. Another's body thrums toward morning and stands under the sky before color has quite returned. These aren't mistakes. They are the leftover rolls of the rota, the way a group made sure the night was stitched from end to end. Offices and schools flatten these differences because noon is easier to organize around than midnight. But the shadows of the old pattern remain in shift schedules, in emergency rooms that hum brighter at 2 a.m., in radio stations that never go silent, in the steady eyes of the pilot who guides a long metal tube through dark air while most of its passengers dream. Even companionship keeps the code. Couples learn each other's watch and make peace with it. The one who startles at roof clicks sleeps nearer the window. The one who sleeps like a felled tree becomes the reliable patch of deep night the other can borrow. Pets apprentice themselves to the craft without being asked. A dog turns once, arranges its ribs against the bedroom door, and becomes a furry hinge. A cat sits at the end of the bed like a small tower watch, ears scanning opposite directions, claiming sentry rights in exchange for morning spoils. Babies recruit whole households into the oldest rotation. Mothers and fathers sleep like dolphins for months. one hemisphere at a time, trading the light of their own nights for a warmer perimeter around someone new. Grandparents step into the late watch with practiced ease, their bodies remembering the old hours, even when their waking days have been quiet for years. The built world offers new versions of signals in the dark. Street lamps are fixed beacons. Motion sensors are the modern brittle seed pods that whisper when a boundary is crossed. A door camera sends you a tiny painting of your porch at 3 a.m., and you can see the neighborhood fox with his tail like a brush stroke and smile, because he is not an enemy scout, only a neighbor on rounds. Apartment buildings have their own rhythms, and if you live in one long enough, you know them by heart. The elevator's soft throat clearing at the top of the hour when the baker leaves. The night shift worker's keys. The one radiator that taps like a gentle woodpecker only when the wind runs from the north. These patterns become the lullaby fence. When they change, when the radiator falls silent on a night it should sing, you turn slightly in your sleep, the interior watcher marking a new thread in the tapestry. Bodies keep showing their inheritance under lab lights too, in quieter ways. Heartbeats ease when a trusted other is close, even unconscious. A hand held under the sheets can move both nervous systems toward calmer shores. Breath sinks. The depth of sleep shifts slowly into alignment across a mattress, a dance your grandmothers already knew without calling it one. People who believe they are protected by proximity, by the neighbor's porch light, by the roommate's cough, by a building's hum, sleep deeper and longer than they do in perfect silence. Solitude has its own power, but for a species that learned to close its eyes by borrowing another's eyes, aloneness at night is a posture that asks to be trained, not assumed. Fear, when it comes, rarely announces itself as a predator's growl anymore. It arrives as a surge in the chest at a remembered embarrassment, as a to-do list that suddenly puts on armor and marches across the mind. The old watch has strategies for that too. It draws boundaries with breath, a long, slow exhale that tells the body the perimeter holds, a counting that doesn't chase sleep, but posts guards at gates of thought. Rituals are the new patrol routes, a light turned off in the same order every night, a glass set rim down near the sink, a line read from a book that smells like dust, not drama. These are not superstition, they are wayfinding. Each repeated act is a silent message to the sentinel inside. Stand down just a notch. Stand by, not at attention. There is a difference, and it matters. We build community watches in other shapes now. A nurse walking the fluorescent corridors at 4 in the morning is a night watcher, her hand on a patient's wrist, not just to count, but to say, I am here. Keep sleeping. The person who drives the last train, who checks the tracks for obstacles so dawn trains can carry suits and backpacks safely, keeps the old oath. The programmer whose screen lights a lonely office, hunting a bug that would wake thousands with broken alarms if left to fester, plays the same role the Ember Keeper did, tending a glow so others can rest in confidence. A neighbor texting a block chat about a stray set of headlights idling too long is ringing the low rattle. A lighthouse still throws its ancient code into waves no one owns. We have fewer open plains and more closed doors, but the night still needs gardeners. Memory itself sleeps in watches. It does not simply arrive in the morning fully formed. It moves through stages, stitched in slow waves, rehearsed in bursts, pruned like a hedge that grows wild by day. The brain sets a few sentries at the borders of what matters and lets the rest grow soft. By morning, some paths are clearer because the night chose them, just as an elder watcher once chose the firmer ground for a midnight walk. Even dreams carry messages in that old half-code, changing fear into fable, so it can be carried to daylight without breaking the hands that carry it. You wake with a story that makes little sense, but leaves the body calmer anyway, as if the watch solved a problem you were not allowed to see. There is also the paradox that some of us were born to give more hours back to the day. Every band seemed to carry one or two who could take the long, cold stretch and still greet the sun without fraying. Today we call them short sleepers and admire or doubt them by turns. But the role existed because a group profits from outliers, someone whose need for the deep pool is small, someone whose wakefulness is bright but not sharp enough to cut them. Those people kept a few more embers alive, and some still do. Early responders, overnight radio voices, the friend who will answer your message at any hour and sound like the hour never asked a price. When neighbors organize under porch bulbs and plan who walks which block on Fridays, when a campus posts the number you can call for a safe ride at midnight, when an old man sits on his stoop because he can't sleep and ends up being the presence that keeps two teenagers from making a terrible small choice under cover of dark, the pattern reasserts itself without ceremony. We have new predators: loneliness, burnout, the mechanical glow that eats melatonin for a snack. But we also have new watchfires: warm conversations, trusted routines, the kindness of someone sweeping the stairwell so the pre-dawn nurse doesn't slip when she leaves. If you stir when the house sighs, if you wake for no reason and listen for a minute, and then drift back, you are not the failure of a sleep app graph. You are part of the relay that got us here. The hand you put on your own heart is the checkpoint. The way you shift the curtain just enough to confirm the street is ordinary is the small patrol. You're not alone in that room, not really. Behind you, in a line the length of a species, people are sitting at the edge of a circle of light, some with spears and songs, some with keys and lanterns, some with clipboards and quiet sneakers. They're not asking you to stay awake with them. They're reminding you that someone always does. And that is a kind of permission your body understands. A lowering of the drawbridge inside the skull, so sleep can cross more easily. Step into the courtyard and lie down where the old watchers kept its place warm for you. And that's our watch for tonight. If this journey through the dark kept you company, tap like, subscribe, and share it with someone who could use a gentler night. Tell me one thing you notice in your own evenings now, one small signal you hadn't heard before. Until next time, sleep easy, and remember, somewhere, someone once stayed awake so you could rest. Good night.